we're largely the pioneers of technology in agriculture around the world. I think that's something really to be proud of.
G'day and welcome to the Farms Advice podcast with your host, Jack Creswell. Whether you farm it, service it, or just love it, this podcast is for you. We'll bring you the techniques and technologies you can implement into your day straight from the leaders and innovators themselves. Spread the Farms Advice so that we can reach more farmers right across Australia. Follow us on all of your socials at Farms Advice, and let's get into this episode. Right, well, Heath Joyner, thank you very much for joining me on the Farms Advice podcast. Great to have you on here, and I'm pretty keen to nerd out on the parts industry of what CaseIH brings. But Heath, welcome to Farms Advice and also the CaseIH series.
Thanks very much, Jack. Real honour and privilege to be involved in this.
100%. And behind you, you've got a couple of models there. Actually, I've got the Steiger 580 behind I picked up from Agribusiness just last year, actually. Good to see we have some common interests. But Heath, before we get stuck into some CaseIH agribusiness, get down to it, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got yourself into your role at CaseIH.
Yeah, so I guess like a lot of people in our organisation, I grew up on a dairy farm in northern Victoria, a little town or a farm just in between Kyabram and Lancaster, not far from Shepparton in northern Vic. My father was a keen dairy farmer, a keen breeder of Holstein cows, right up until the day he retired a couple of years ago. Obviously did school there, joined the Air Force straight out of school, spent my time as an aircraft engine and airframe technician, or a black-hander, as they were quite often coined. So spent nearly 7 years in the Air Force, fixing F-111s principally, up here, not far out of Ipswich. I guess a few things happened, but ultimately was looking for a way back to ag, and found a place with a CaseIH dealership in northwestern New South Wales at Moree, which I joined as a field service technician. Worked my way, I guess, from ground up there as a field service guy, doing mainly tractor services at the time. Moved on to service manager, and then when I guess life circumstances changed and had to move back to Brisbane, I looked for an opportunity with a couple of our key suppliers, but found a home with CaseIH at that time, and I've sort of been here in a couple of different roles ever since. So 15 years now with CaseIH and I guess the broader organisation.
Amazing, and probably forever evolving as well. No day is the same, as they say in agriculture. Probably the biggest cliche, but the most truest as well.
Absolutely. When you look at even the evolution that farm machinery technology has taken, even over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Probably the simplest analogy is if I take the biggest tractor that CaseIH built back then, in the late 90s, very early 2000s, was, 425 horsepower. It was a 9390 four-wheel drive Steiger. Within a couple of years, in fact, by 2011, we had a Steiger 600, which peaked out at 670 horsepower. In fact, even now, our largest front-wheel assist tractor has got more horsepower than the biggest four-wheel drive that we did back then. So even if you just use that, there's a lot of change. But then, obviously with the technology continuing to creep its way through Australian agriculture, and we're largely the pioneers of technology in agriculture around the world. I think that's something really to be proud of. I know a lot of people from Australia do study tours to other countries, in particular to North America, looking for that next thing. But, I think the Australian farmer in the most part is by far more resourceful and resilient and technology adoptive than most other areas around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of the launching pad, the sandbox for the farmers to play around in, pretty much break the machine, try to break it, and how that can sort of learn and be taken into the development of parts, services, and also the machinery in the end.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we try and break our machinery here, But certainly, look, it's imperative for us. We're not protected by a lot of the, subsidies and government programs that maybe other farmers enjoy around the world. So certainly, we've got to make every minute a winner. And I think there's an expectation that, if a machine says it can do 100%, it should do 100%. So we certainly push them to their limit, that's for sure. But I wouldn't say we intentionally go and try and break them.
No, of course not. So, Heath, tell me about your role as parts and services head of, and it's for ANZ, isn't it? Australia and
yeah, it is. Look, it's a big role, but I think one that structurally fits very well. While there's the usual jibing between streams, as we do as Australians, I mean, we only put shit on people we like, right? That jibing between, who's most important and who isn't is always going to exist there. But the reality is that parts and service must form a symbiotic relationship.
Yep.
One can't really do its job without the support of the other and vice versa. So to have, I guess, both those critical elements, so I guess sitting under that after sales banner, working together and side by side to make sure we keep machines operational is a critical success factor for us. So we've got, the warehouse and inventory planning and looking through, I guess the business with a real forward focused lens, given our lead times that we have to work with around the world. I mean, we're relying on suppliers all around the world and we've got to have that stuff here in preparation for those seasonal events that take place. That's becoming more challenging. Likewise, the machinery is becoming more complex. And I think, every one of your listeners would sympathise with the fact that good people are hard to find, especially in Australian agriculture at the moment. We're no different. We rely on people that have come from farming backgrounds, that live in regional areas to be able to, they just get it right. They understand what happens at dealerships. They understand what happens on farms. They understand the time critical nature of what it is we do. So getting good people from a technical perspective in particular is probably our single biggest challenge that the country faces right at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe not even locked into what agriculture is, but the time sensitive nature of what agriculture is brings a whole nother level of challenges from that. But let's look at the industry where we are currently. Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag here on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And it's also pretty prime conditions over in WA and towards the middle as well. They're having good conditions.
Yep.
What's happening in the industry? We all sort of thought planting like the biggest crop that we're going to get off. It's probably been downplayed a little bit now because of the weather happening. But what are you seeing in terms of parts and service? Like, has that sort of changed for you?
Yeah, look, I guess, again, we've got so many people dedicated and primed for this time of the year, right? It is a really difficult time of the year. Every process we've got is tested. And, that's typically characterized by we sort of nearly start on a certain day and within reason, you sort of finish on a certain day and there's not a lot of downtime in between. This year, like I think I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a season characterized by, it's going to be very long, but characterized by some periods of some really high intensity interspersed with probably not, periods of not doing much. And there's promise and pitfall in both of those elements. One, you could look at those periods of downtime, particularly for technical support staff in dealerships and us. We can take a breath. But, again, given the, the nature and availability of technical staff in the field, it's just going to give them an opportunity to catch up, not necessarily catch their breath per se. It's going to, I guess, it will obviously play a toll on farmers and producers, but it pays a big toll on our staff as well, because we know that, perfectly rational people for 11 months of the year can turn, it gets to them after a while, and our guys and gals end up getting the receiving end of that from time to time, and that can wear you down a little bit. But we get it. We know what it's like. It's a high pressure time of the year, and we always do our best to make sure we deliver and support customers.
Yeah, 100%. There's a bit of a hustle and bustle in the paddock and also in the shop and parts sort of industry to get that uptime sort of going and roll.
Yeah.
All that paddock. It's pretty paramount for farmers to keep rolling. I shared a photo today actually about a header getting chased down by a storm, and that's what it's that's the analogy of what's happening currently.
Yeah, look, we do a lot to get people that work in our warehouse or in other support roles out to farms.
Yep.
At different times of the year to help them understand. I mean, one of our major warehouses, obviously in Sydney. A lot of those people have got, very limited experience and exposure to Australian agriculture, and maybe fall victim from time to time to the perception that agriculture is a pretty cruisy lifestyle, and to some degree it is, but at these times of the year it's far from that. And so we do a lot to try and help them understand the critical nature of timeliness.
Yeah.
But also, I use the analogy quite a lot. Take the example of the storm you brought up just a moment ago. You can turn a crop from, $400 a ton to $200 a ton, in 15 or 20 minutes with a storm. How would you like it if I walked into you and said you're losing half your salary for no fault of your own? And that sort of brings things home pretty quickly. So
I could imagine. And also, like, coming into these sort of peaks and troughs, we all sort of tend to think about harvest, broadacre. We know harvest goes right the way through agriculture, well into horticulture, and your machinery is used right throughout it as well.
Yep.
But through those peaks and troughs, come through planting time to harvest time. Where are these wear and tears sort of coming from? Because we spoke to Pete, the GM of Case, and he had pretty insightful elements in his episode of like how much Case is dialing down on what sort of parts are performing, what aren't, and how they can actually, how you're improving these as a running sort of dialogue.
Yeah, look, it's a great question, Jack. The simple answer to that is, it changes all the times, and mostly with conditions, that machines experience in the field. In drought years or particularly dry years, we tend to see a lot of, wear through machinery because the crop head carries a lot of dust in it. Whereas, years like this, we tend to see probably a lot more major failure of, crop heads are, they're shallow root systems, crop heads are heavy. The crop falls over, we get a bit of wind, crop falls over, so we're down on the deck, we're picking up everything we can to make sure we get all that crop heads. Now we pick up, in that process, we pick up sticks, rocks, tines, discs, all sorts of matter, ends up going through, in particular combines this time of year, causing, major damage. It's hard on drive lines with wet conditions as well. So yeah, every year is different. We spend a lot of time analyzing uptime data, analyzing part demand data, looking at weather patterns. Our planning, for argument's sake, our planning for next year's harvest is actually starting now. Yeah. We've already placed our orders to have parts into this country for next year's seeding. We need to be working sort of 9 to 12 months out from the actual season that we're going into. We look at machine and product behavior over a period of time. So we're encompassing things like telematics data, warranty failure data, physical meetings with dealerships in different states around the country, and understand from them and grab that anecdotal evidence. And there's various other means by which we grab information, bring it together into organized forums, and really pull it apart to understand what's going on as a means to best predicting what's going to happen next time around and what we need to be prepared for. So we take machine uptime extremely seriously. With, I'll use a separate standalone meeting amongst senior management to monitor what's going on and make sure we're on top of things, because again, we just know the critical nature. It's not necessarily the cost of the repairs nowadays, it's the cost of the downtime that really affects customers.
Yeah, certainly. And I think farmers are looking to measure that downtime more so the cost towards and that impact that it can have in the end. For that,
and I'll probably just add to that though. It's not. I mean, I talk a lot about the obvious grain harvest, but the cane industry in particular is another one that really is very sensitive to machine downtime. I mean, they all are, but those two are standouts.
Yeah, certainly. And we've had some great examples coming through on the series talking all about that and jumping across into the different sectors from cane to broadacre, across the horticulture as it goes along. But forecasting for yourself as farmers, we like to get the forecast for the weather, but forecasting the parts, how is that done? And is it a bit of a spider web of where these go and like that 9-12 months ahead? How's that done?
Yeah, look, I guess it starts with understanding one, the vehicle park. What do we physically have out there to begin with, and where is it? We take a really deep dive in understanding part demand, not just here locally, but also from other markets around the world. We'll quite often, and I guess in utilizing new technologies coming through, telematics data can quite often, there's a real opportunity to use telematics data as a means to understanding machine utilization as well. The next element is, obviously the service and warranty records, what's typically being claimed under warranty as well. So like I said, there's a whole raft of data sources that we have to bring together and, I guess to some degree, put some new batteries in our magic wands and crystal balls every now and again and try and come out with something. But the science is getting better. I mean, the tools, the business intelligence tool that are available to OEs, like us, are getting better and better all the time. We've got some awesomely talented people that love their numbers, that that have come together and understand what it is that we need to do in keeping machines operational. And look, I'm no expert in that space. I rely on them implicitly to get it right. And I think over the last couple of years in particular, even through COVID, in Australia, we've been able to maintain, fill rates probably better than most other markets around the world, in spite of being so far away from the rest of the world where our product comes from.
Absolutely. And probably moving into the statement of, like, do you agree with the statement that farmers, probably from the impact of COVID, are actually starting to store a couple of bit more parts, so they're ready to react with a breakdown or something like that, with stress of the equipment, and that's relieved you, and you felt that impact from the
I think farmers certainly have started to increase their own parts holdings. Certainly our dealers have. And I think that's a phenomenon not just felt in agriculture, right across Australian industry in general. Inventory that, it could have been argued that, was pretty easy and close to get prior to COVID. It hasn't been. So they've been able to justify a greater level of inventory being held locally in Australia, and we're no different to that. That's been exacerbated by, again, I guess the lead times blowing out to physically get those parts into depots around the world to begin with as well. We've got that transit time we need to deal with. So certainly we've increased our inventory holding here in Australia significantly over the last 2 years. Ultimately, customers will be the benefit of that, but dealers themselves need to have a big pat on the back to recognise the need to do that themselves and having, a little bit more on shelves.
Absolutely. And probably keeping track of your sort of service for your different machinery. What has that done, and has it changed over the years you've seen with CaseIH for farmers, like being more critical in making sure that it is serviced on time after it's 100 hour, 200 or 1,000 hour?
Yeah. Yes, the answer is yes, particularly with harvest equipment.
Yeah.
Over a lot of years, I think there's been a general recognition by growers to really invest in preventative maintenance. We don't see it a lot on the tractors yet, and I encourage people, if there was one bit of advice, I could give is, for a couple of different reasons, consider the tractor in the same mindset. It needs preventative maintenance as well. To coin a phrase that I use quite often, chance favours the prepared mind. If we're investing in that equipment and we're doing as much as we can on a preventative basis, the chances of a major failure or breakdown in season is reduced. But I know some areas around the country where this season will finish, they'll blow the machine down, and they'll drive it straight from their farm to their dealership, and they'll commence the pre-season process for next year's harvest straight away. And there's a number of advantages in that. Outside of making sure you're prepared for next year as an operator or as an owner, it gives the dealership time to schedule work. It gives both the dealership and us opportunity to understand what parts are required and get them here in a timely and a cost-effective manner. And then once they're here, then technicians in particular, instead of going through these really big highs and lows of huge work requirements, it allows them to schedule their work over that full year to keep them busy all year round, and then not avoid that really big rush towards the end. So there are a lot of advantages for every stakeholder, in the preventative maintenance change to really look, at approaching vehicle maintenance that way.
Yeah, it really is looking at that preventable sort of element prior to coming up into it. And as farmers, we're getting a bit more savvier. So straight after harvest, getting it into for its maintenance service is probably the best sort of thing we can do to keep that uptime. And also, once we go into planting season, we don't have to worry about our harvest gear as it's sort of taken care of. And rolling into harvest, there's nothing worse than having to get on the crop tomorrow and your header or something's not quite ready to go.
Yeah.
And you're having some stressful times ahead as the farmer, especially this year. You've only got like a couple of day window or something. If a storm's coming, just chasing after another one, pretty important to get right.
Yeah, absolutely. Life's tough enough and farming's tough enough without, ignoring some of those things that, some of those challenges that we sort of knew were there but didn't do anything about earlier on, and then we get to peak season and then something else goes wrong. It all just sort of compounds. And so anything we can do from that's our main game, is to keep meat machines operational and avoid those in-season breakdowns with preventative maintenance. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have an in-season breakdown, but you are at least minimizing or mitigating your risk. Again, take the parts out of it. Even if we look at the technical ability that we've got out there and that limitation we've got on technicians, they're run ragged already. Anything you can do to reduce your reliance on those guys will be, obviously be a big advantage in season. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about dotting your I's and crossing your H's for CaseIH for that one. But moving into like the sort of digital age, we've got a lot of sort of things working into it. AgTech's a big buzz, but also within our machinery, it's improved drastically over the last 20 years, as you would know. How are farmers sort of working with this, updating their sort of skill set to be able to work with this to the best ability. We spoke with Sean with AFS Connect, how that's working for farmers, collecting the data to improve your own farm, and also for yourself, your machine data off the back of that. But what about, how does this work in terms of parts and services, and what are farmers sort of looking for that you've seen?
Yeah, again, I think in a lot of cases at the moment, it's sort of a little bit of a situation. You don't know what you don't know. You don't really fully appreciate what, things like connected vehicles can bring to the table from a product and service point of view. Sorry, a parts and service point of view. I think, our main aim is always to maintain machine uptime.
Yeah.
And, the ability to, we receive early warnings or fault codes, notification of fault codes that exist in a machine. And, I think, for a lot of farmers themselves, they're not always the ones driving the machines, right? And, we rely on labor from all over the world. Some of it is, not, hasn't had a lot of exposure to machinery. And mightn't always fully understand what a stop engine light means, or an amber alert might mean. So, I mean, the peace of mind that comes from, having someone either, at our level as the OE, or at a dealership locally, watching machines and gathering this data and, making a phone call either to the operator themselves or to, the owner, and say, hey, do you realize that, you've got this critical warning active on your machine? Do you want to go and, do you want us to do something about it? Do you want to go and do something about it? Can you call the operator, find out what's going on? I think there's a real opportunity for peace of mind for customers in that space. Likewise, the opportunity for serviceability. Again, our lives are complicated enough as it is. If a dealership is making a call to say, hey, this thing is due for a service, when can we schedule it in? That's one less thing the owner has to worry about, of all the other things going on in his or her world. So I think there's some real simplicity that we can realize over time.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, it's, operational data. What opportunity does it offer us by way of understanding, long-term reliability and durability? And that's ultimately a big advantage for all users and customers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think looking from that, we can see the sort of journey of where parts and services and the increased sort of serviceability that's needed for that sort of technology coming in through, and also how much we're getting out of the machinery currently opposed to 20 years ago is immeasurable for that. But what do you think the parts and service industry or sector of CaseIH looks like for the next 5 to 10 years? Where's it sort of tending to go?
I think there will be a greater, I do think there'll be a greater leverage on, on information. I mean, fundamentally, I don't know that our role will change that much. I think there will be some diversification in skill set, as manufacturers continue to, look at things like alternative fuels and electrification. I think, if you're in the mines, you're not just a diesel guy anymore. There's as many high voltage electrical guys as there are the diesel guys. So, what happens in that space in time frame, I'm not too sure. The agricultural technician in particular, while there are some specialty people as well, guys in agricultural, when I say guys and girls that work as technicians in agriculture don't have the luxury of just being a specialist in, in engines or transmissions or drive lines or hydraulics. They have to be a jack of all trades across the electricals, across the precision farming systems, the transmissions, drive lines, and even implements now, with smarter implements, making commands on the tractor. Balers telling tractors how fast to go in order to maintain 100% productivity. So, understanding, agronomic conditions as well is requirement. So from a service perspective, there will be a continuing evolution in the skill set required for them. From a parts perspective, we'll continue to introduce more business intelligence to make our forecasting better and more accurate, to make sure that we've got the right place in the right time. We'll leverage, I think to a greater extent, localized, probably more regionalized, parts hubs where we've got, a given amount of inventory located strategically around the country to make sure that, again, access to those bigger and larger parts is fast.
Yep.
But fundamentally, our role is to, from a parts perspective, won't change too much. I don't think it will be more a leverage of that business intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. By the sounds of it, it's all about that sort of compounding 1%ers. How you
is.
automate the process, especially within parts and service being so demanding at peaks and troughs for that, but also trying to spread that flow out across a year, right across that spider web of what you would have across your dealerships. For that, interesting to see where it does go though. Just like yourself, we're probably looking out for what's happening in 5 years to 10 years, or what's even happening now for those planning or waiting to get on. But Heath, for this episode, what would you like the listeners to take away from this about parts and services for those already midway through their planting season, and for those like us waiting for a drop of rain to get started?
Look, I go probably a couple of things. Look, I fully accept that it's going to be a frustrating year and very intense, and people will just want to get the crop off. But machinery is not indestructible.
Yeah.
It does have its limitations. So I guess please be aware of that. Be aware of the people that are around to support you, both with us directly, but also within dealerships. They're human beings as well. I know that, again, towards the end of the season, people get tired and cranky and frustrated, but again, they're out there performing a huge support service to probably a foundational industry of this country. They love doing it. I love doing it. But it'd be nice to be able to do it without some of the anger sometimes. Yep. But we get it, like I said. And then the last bit is, just be really aware of preventive maintenance and what that is actually worth, to your overall operation year in, year out. It's an investment worth making over the long term. And the earlier you choose to do that, the better it is for all stakeholders involved in that support chain.
100%. And the last few years just goes to show how hard farmers have had it with those few wet years. And over here on the West Coast, not for everyone, but it is getting a fair bit dry, especially for our own farm here. So hopefully everyone can hold out wherever you're listening to this episode. If you're going into planting season, you're still harvesting your summer crop, I'm sure, and we wish you the very best for your season coming ahead. But Heath, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast. I think this is a great little wrap for leading into harvest for those that already started. But how can actually people contact yourself maybe, or even their local dealership? What's the best way to go about being more prepared and planning?
Yeah, look, certainly, I'm available on probably the main one for me would be LinkedIn if people want to reach out via that.
Yep.
Obviously your first port of call is your local dealer. If you're not sure who that is, then, there is the CaseIH website as a means to that, but I'm sure most listeners would know where their local CaseIH dealer is in town.
Yep.
But certainly, if people want to reach out to me directly, probably via LinkedIn would be the most appropriate, the most appropriate platform.
Amazing. Well, Heath, thank you very much for coming on to FarmersWise podcast and the CaseIH series.
Thanks very much for having me, Jack. It's been a hoot and a real humbling experience.
This Farms Advice episode does not stop here. Come and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, and even join our Facebook group. Go to farmsadvice.com.au for more on this episode and spread the hashtag farmsadvice to your mates. If you can leave a review on Apple or Spotify, that will let other farmers find us too. But until then, see you next Tuesday. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Farmers Advice podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people today.